She is a double board certified pediatrician who speaks regularly on health equity and children's vaccinations. She also is the author of Navigating a Triple Pandemic, which is a series of books. She'll be talking to us about that today. And she travels the world conducting health and wellness workshops. Many of those workshops are going to be very advantageous for all of you guys, our audience. So we want to hear about that and the seminars and retreats that she holds. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Yolanda. How are you?
I'm great. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. And thank you, just listening to what you've been doing and what you plan to continue to do, throughout your tenure is just such a welcome difference. Not just, I think some people are doing it, but we need as many as we can get, and people really motivated and activated even to do the work and to get information to communities so that we can make all of our communities better. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Absolutely. I thank you. And I thank you for recognizing, and thank you for being out there, because we know in our community, just showing up is huge. People get their eyes light up. They're like, what? You part of us, you part of this community. And so it is our responsibility to not just show up, but show up with truth, transparency, and honesty, when with the tools that are actually going to move us forward as a community. So I am so thankful, because you got plenty of tools that we want to get into. So one of the things that I just was very impressed by your resume, as being an emergency physician myself and entrepreneur, is that you have traversed academia, media, film, advocacy, and you've been international and in a very short period of time. So we have a lot of medical students and young professionals that follow us. Please tell us, what was that trajectory looking like when you were a medical student? And did you ever think you would be this kind of position today?
That's a great question. I think I sort of anticipated as much, only because even medical school, like my medical school career, I don't think was the straightforward, right out of undergrad into medical school, and then, you start your life. I actually was a Peace Corps volunteer before med school. So I served in Cape Verde. I was in West Africa. And I think that shaped really my desire and my understanding about community work. And while I was in undergrad, I was an RA, a residential assistant. So I used to do these things on my floor where I would have to teach, and I'd have to, do programming. I was the Black Student Union president at the same time. I was in the junior NAACP chapter, and I was, vice president there. So there are all these things that I was doing. And at the same time, I was a biology major, which meant I, had a pretty vigorous, a vigorous schedule, if you will. And interestingly, one of the questions, you had posed at one point when you had sent some information about, just wanting to talk to me, was what would I've told my younger self? And I think just talking to young medical students and young medical professionals, and what I think I would have told myself is just believe in you, right? Believe in yourself, bet on you all day long, because the problem is people are going to be betting against you so much and so often, and you can't take that personal, but you also, you can't listen to those words, be like a duck, with water, just, able to just sort of run off of you, beads of water, because insults are going to come. People are going to underestimate you. In fact, it fueled me when people would underestimate me. And so, but when I was younger, I didn't always have that. But what I did have, in terms of that confidence, but what I did have was a family and a community that told me I could do anything I put my mind to. And so when I didn't have the faith and confidence in myself, I did have those words of encouragement that I had grown up with that actually helped mold and protect me until I could speak that for myself.
Mm-hmm. No, that's powerful. That's powerful. I think you froze slightly there. I don't know. We're gonna get her back. She was just dropping some gems. That is Dr. Yolanda Lewis Regland. Um, but we just got her frozen, so we hope to get her back. She's dropping some real gems about betting on yourself all day.
I mean, yeah.
There she comes. Hello.
All right. So here's the deal. Let me community for over 20 years. I'm in Southeast DC, which is one of the poorest and most vulnerable communities in the nation. The reason I proceed with that going forward is that is not an excuse, but it is to let you know that our internet connection, sometimes I'm affected just like my community is. And the reason I work here is because it motivates me to push harder to make sure they have health access, they have food access, they have internet access, right? All the accesses that should be afforded to all communities. And so I've been living here for over 20 years. And so I know personally how painful it is to have slow internet and to have just things that are affecting communities. So I apologize now, and I apologize if it happens, because every once in a while, to say my internet is unstable. But again, what I was saying was, it's just so important to have community members.
Well, I think to make a mention of that,
yeah,
just to that point, I'm just saying, just to that point, we are dealing with digital divide, and what experience is in that community talking about it is everything truthful. So we take it in and we accept, because that's a real live lived experience. And even at your level, you are challenged with that. Can you imagine what our communities are dealing with, trying to get on telehealth, trying to get connected, and they don't have reliable internet? So yes, preach, and we understand.
Like you said, you are preaching to the choir. The reason I do what I do, again, my experience in the Peace Corps meant you need to live in your community. You need to experience with your community. You immerse yourself in a community. You understand what they need, and then you work from there. Lots of times people come into communities and dictate and determine what they think a community needs, and they have no idea. They have no clue. Yes, they're intellectuals, and they have read books on and reports on what might be needed in that community. But there's also that level of living in a community and working with and among a community that gives you an insight. It's something as small as when you don't have strong community, you don't have strong internet connections. What are the things that can be affected? Telehealth, right? Information, the information gap that occurred with education. Our young kids that were left behind during the pandemic because they were in home, they were forced to, isolate at home. But if the digital divide, if you don't have the connection that you need, if your parents can't help you because they can't teach you and they can't even get the information off the internet, then you're going to be further and further behind. So this pandemic just opened up such so many eyes. And it wasn't that it opened our eyes, because we already knew this was going on, right? But it became commonplace to have conversations about what equity really meant. What are the social determinants of health? How do people not know that everybody doesn't have access to education? Everybody doesn't have workforce development. Everybody doesn't have the criminal justice system actually keeps some people from entering the workplace. Some people don't have the education to have the literacy that they need to actually utilize things like PPP, loans, or all of these agency-led, systematic, supposed programs that were supposed to help individuals in communities like this. If you couldn't even access it, if you couldn't understand it, if you couldn't get someone to help you through the process, then by the time you tried to apply for something, it was gone. And there were plenty of small businesses that were Black and Brown owned businesses that did not get that funds. And then we saw all of we don't want to talk about how it was overutilized and misused. I try not to call it theft, but it was misused by big businesses who had oh my God, it just didn't make sense that they were applying for some of these loans, and they were getting millions and billions. I mean, and we could go on into the volleyball field that was recently discovered that was built off of Medicaid money. So anyway, my point is that when you have people in our community that work within the community, understand the community, are struggling with the community, and my struggle is real. I've been in my home for over 20 years, and I barely have home equity because I've decided to live in a particular community and in a neighborhood because I think it would help those around me. It didn't help me as much as it is helping them, but it does help me on other levels that I could never repay for in terms of just the richness and the connections and just loving up on a community that really has been left behind by so many others. I wouldn't give it up, for the world. I've been here over 20 years, and I'm very grateful for a lot of the interactions and experiences that I've had. And I just appreciate serving and living in my community.
I love that. And I love what you're doing, where you stand for. I mean, as soon as you mentioned Peace Corps, Shared Harvest built the platform. We wanted to create Peace Corps in our own backyards. We want to make it super easy because we knew that those who cared about their communities and doing the impact work were already doing that work already, and may not have had the to go a platform so that people can do it, get recognized for it, and then address the number one thing, that financial security that you were just talking about. Living in a community for 20 years, there's still this financial challenges around that. And as professionals who carry all this debt load, it's just a second mortgage on top of that. So we really wanted, and we still are aimed at solving that problem because we truly believe, like you said, you are an asset to be there. Your presence is an asset. And so we should use that asset as a value add to eliminate that student debt. And I just had to say, like you dropped the gem about this volleyball court and how the misuse of federal funding that went to supporting those who didn't need it. However, when we're talking about student debt cancellation, now there's a big issue. Now there's a question about who needs it. Now there's a question about, are we paying for people who already can pay for themselves? Which is kind of ironic because if you've been paying for something for about 12, 15 years, I think the jury's out on whether or not you can afford to keep paying it, right?
And the other issue is that what people don't want to put on the table or really have a real discussion about is that, the baby boomer generation, when college was affordable, you could actually work through the summer and make enough money to put yourself through college that following year. We now have a 4 to 5 to 6-fold increase in tuition. Don't ask why, because the buildings are still the same age. Yes, they're building some more buildings, but tuition ain't gone up that much. Ask professors and teachers, they're not getting that much money more, right? They're doing a lot of digitalization of a lot of the things that actually needed to be done. So we don't understand why it's costing that much more anyway, 6 times more money to educate an individual. And now you can't just work through the summer to get enough money to put yourself through college. I mean, I got through college and, like you said, medical school, and it's another mortgage that I have to pay on top of the home and you think to go into a noble profession where you're actually going to give back and help others, it would actually be something that they would want to help you with in that loan, paying off those loans. But we also didn't talk, and you want to know we're worthy of it, but no one's asking whether the billionaires are worthy of the tax credits that they received. No one talked about how much those companies were actually giving back in the community. What were they actually giving back to their employees? How are they benefiting not just their local communities, but the more broad global community? They didn't have any grades that were given to them. I mean, it would have made more sense if you were affecting the local community, the national community, or the global community by this much. Then your tax, then they would defer your taxes or forgive taxes for this much. But they were not. There was nothing that made them literally look at them and give them any reason to do it. It was a broad stroke of a pen, and the administration said, yeah, we're just going to forgive that. But then when you talk about student loan forgiveness for people who are small business owners or business owners or professionals who are actually contributing to society, and then when they get out of that debt, they can help actually increase the economy. No, why are we not having this conversation? That you're better off helping these individuals, these small businesses and individuals, than you are for billionaire corporations who didn't give that money back, because they weren't actually asked to invest any of that money back. They just got the tax credit and break, and didn't have to do anything to give back, to even contribute. What happened?
Exactly. And just as you're talking about it, right? So the big conversation around public health is health equity. What's the agenda? The National Public Health Association put a affirmative mention that, you know, there is racism in our society and it impacts healthcare, and we have to do something about that. And we know there's no way that you're going to be able to do anything about that without having a workforce that's going to be able to drive that agenda forward.
And the diversity in the workforce is necessary. And those who tend to have to take these loans are those that look like me and you. And as we try to diversify the workforce to work in these communities of color, these BIPOC communities, and actually address health equity from a culturally competent standpoint. You know, we've been patriarchal for too long. Men have been handing out information on women's health, right? Gynecology and obstetrics for far too long. All of these men without uteruses, without uteri, have been like the overarching voice of even a field that they can't even relate to. But overall, you also have in the medical field itself, you know about this in how the American Medical Association started itself in 1847, would not allow Black physicians. About 50 years later or so, the Medical Association, and even within that, right after they started, I don't know if I'm frozen or not because it's saying I'm unstable. As soon as I try to say something, they try to shut me down. But 50 years later, we started our own organization, and within 10 to 15 years of starting that organization, that Flexner report came out. And the Flexner report was the one that was heavily biased and basically recommended, and the AMA was behind it, recommended that there was about 7 Black medical schools at the time. And we all know that we're mostly coming out of HBCUs and Black, medical schools or other professional schools. In fact, there's some statistics that says that 70% of dentists and doctors have degrees from HBCUs. Exactly. So not just their graduate level, but on some level, right? So the point I'm making is when that Flexner report came out, the AMA helped put these recommendations forth, and there were several recommendations, but the top ones were that 5 of the 7 medical schools were shut down. So they only left 2, Howard and Meharry. Then they recommended that Black physicians only treat Black patients. Okay. They also recommended that Black physicians were not intelligent enough or skilled enough to be anything other than general practitioners. So they suggested that we should not be specialists, nor should we participate in research as researchers. They wanted to research us because we all know about the Tuskegee experiment, all these other experiments where they research on us, but they specifically suggested that we weren't, that we didn't have what it took to be researchers. And anyway, there's a whole lot of stuff. And almost 100 years later, the American Medical Association issued a formal apology to Black physicians, and specifically wrote it to the NMA, one, for trying to curtail the growth of our community, of us as people, and really for the role that they played in the racism and the discrimination against us overall. But the problem is it had lingering effects. There are very few of us that are specialists now, right? And the specialists are where the top dollars are, orthopedic physicians, physicians and ophthalmologists and dermatologists, all of these areas where there aren't very many of us that are there. We're all, most of us are in the primary care positions, right? The other thing is, you and I are unicorns. There are 5% of the population in this country of physicians is Black, and 2.7% is female and Black. So there are not very many of us. We cannot possibly be able to serve our communities without the support of the government, who put this nation in this place and that it's in, where they curtailed us from being able to actually become the professionals that we needed to be, have the resources and have the support that we needed to actually serve our communities with the most with the best equipment, education, innovation, all of these things that we're now trying to correct. And truth is, we're slowly correcting it, but it's not fast enough. And then something happens like a pandemic, and it throws us for a loop, because we were already behind the 8 ball. We were behind, and we were talking about it. We were starting to murmur about equity and about social determinants of health, and what did it look like, and how could we possibly, and they were slow rolling us until we got slammed by the pandemic, and they realized, look, we're dying. We're dying like by the droves. And most of it was because we were on the front line, not just those of us that are healthcare workers, but we were on the front line as workers. Exactly. Who in grocery stores, right, in restaurants and all these service areas, and it was affecting us deeply. And so all of a sudden their economy was, at stake, and we had to start thinking about, oh wait, how can we support a system where we can actually stay at home and still order our groceries and our delivery, and they come to us safely, so that we don't get sick in this pandemic.
Right. And it was about reduce the number in the healthcare system.
Absolutely. So the outcomes obviously were horrific before, but if we're planning to address these outcomes seriously, then we have to diversify, increase this diverse healthcare workforce. Mm-hmm. And one of the smallest things we can do is look at how student loan cancellation, debt cancellation can be a means toward reparations. How about that conversation?
Exactly. I mean, we went a little somewhere else with this conversation, but it's so necessary and timely, because what you're honestly talking about is, how do we strengthen and reinforce the medical pipeline to address these issues? And it's not just enough to send referendums out. One of the things you said, AMA 100 years finally apologizes. We finally have Aletha Maybanks, the first Black woman run as the chief health equity officer at the AMA level. And she has bold moves, but these are going to be ambitious moves that have to filter down to what's happening in the community. And one of the things I wanted you to hopefully had a chance to speak on is, academia and Black professionals are flying out of there because of the abuse as professionals in the field, when we also understand we carry a lot of weight as mentors, as researchers, as contributors. The new head of the National Medical Fellowship, amazing, that she is taking the forefront of changing how we do clinical research and how minorities of color do clinical research. And all of these things are there doesn't seem to be this open and appreciative voice in academia. And people like you have, amazing side hustles, but they're not even side hustles because they're necessary attributes to bring our community forward. So if you can speak to a lot about what can we do to strengthen the support around professionals in academia, and then talk about your book, because I think it's important that people know that the tools that are out there, and the tools are being created by people like yourself who are really committed to the community.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I actually just came from a conference this past weekend in Alabama. and it was for the Association for the Study of African American Language and Histories, ASALH. And interestingly, I was on a panel called How Black Practitioners Rewrite, Re-narrate, and Reimagine Health Equity. And so one of the things I talked about in my role was that part about rewriting, right? And I talk a lot about, if we don't write down our stories, somebody else is going to write it for us. If we don't tell what has happened, and I recognize in the beginning that the pandemic was historic, that something was happening that hadn't happened in over 100 years. And if we didn't talk about the fear, the fear mongering, the myths and disinformation, the hesitancy, the health disparities, you know, all the stuff that was showing up on top of the trauma that we were experiencing just as Black and brown people. You know, I kept talking about the fact that I was showing up in my white coat, but that white coat wasn't protecting me from what I felt, the trauma I felt watching as we stayed sheltered at home and watched everything on the news, as we watched George Floyd, you know, die before our eyes, you know, with a knee to his neck because he couldn't breathe, calling out for his mother. As we watched as Breonna Taylor was shot in her bed at home because, you know, they got the wrong, you know, address or had a warrant that wasn't, you know, that wasn't legal. You know, there were just so many things. And this was not new for us, but I think it was the first time, you know, Ahmaud Arbery, that's where it started for me when I watched how this young man was literally lynched in 2021. Like that was a real modern day lynching of these white men who felt justified chasing him down because somebody was going, what they thought it was him, but it was somebody going through abandoned houses or houses that were being built in their neighborhood. And they really felt that they could take it upon themselves to actually track him down and shoot him. And for so long, we have been terrorized like this for a long time. So this is multi-generational, intergenerational trauma that we have experienced. And my point in writing about how I experienced this as just me, a Black woman who happened to be a physician, was also a mom, and am a mom of 3 children. And particularly when my son would go out, at the time he was 18 and he loved to skateboard. And every time he left the house, I was terrified that he would not come home. I was tormented. I personally experienced anything, right? But we were all experiencing it collectively. And so when I began to write about this, I really talked to other colleagues and I said, you know, am I the only one that when I walk into a room with a white coat on, I feel like a fake when I'm like, hey, how can I help you today? But on the inside, I'm broken into all these pieces and I need somebody to ask me how they can help me. But I also understood that in my own trauma, these people were even more traumatized than I was because I at least had a steady job and I had a roof over my head and I could pay for my groceries and I could get things delivered if I needed to. You know, my kids were, you know, in college and their tuition was being paid. And I, you know, I didn't have a job that was going to stop me. Look, telehealth came around. I still had to work. I mean, I was working more hours. You know, you know that, right? Up in the medical profession, we were like, well, look, we're not out of a job at all. Like if we were going to be out of a job, it was because we were taking the great exodus because it was like just mentally on, you know, breaking us. But in terms of having the job and needing the hours, we weren't there, right? They needed us. And so all of that was going on. And I'm like, how am I helping others in this process and not figuring out how to help myself? What will help me? So I began to just write about it. That was cathartic in itself, but I talked to some other colleagues and I realized we're not in this alone. And so there's an African proverb that I love that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so when I wanted to get this message out about what we were experiencing, I realized they're not going to want to read about how this one little person in Southeast DC, who's a mom, and how I experienced it. But it would be more powerful and more compelling if the stories were interwoven and they could see the similarities of all of these Black and brown professionals, healthcare professionals. And what I also did was I didn't limit it to physicians. I got nurses and pharmacists and techs, like, because we were all in this together and we could experience it in silos if we wanted, but I didn't want that. I wanted us to really recognize that we were on the same team, right? So that being said, the first book, Navigating a Triple Pandemic, how healthcare workers of color confront racism in America, health disparities in medicine, and the trauma of COVID-19 was born. There was 15 of us that wrote in it. And it became a series because when I finished, I was ready to be done. I had to, get the book out because I have a nonprofit called Dr. Yolanda Cares, and I do a heart health event every year. And I started changing it from Dr. Yolanda's heart health awareness to heart health and health disparities awareness because it needed to be, put together. And so we launched the first book at my event. It was like my third or fourth annual event. And so it was the third annual. And so once we launched the book, though, there were others who were like, I missed the deadline, but I have a lot happening going on. I think I could really contribute. There's something, I experienced. So I felt really bad. I was like, yeah, I can't be just because I needed to finish the book that time. There must be, let me give the opportunity for others. So I got a second book that we did. It was just volume 2, same title. But the difference in that is the subtitle for that one was volume 2, COVID virus and vaccine facts, fiction, and fears. Because we really got into how the first part was just the unknown of it all. The second part was all the craziness that happened around the vaccine and the virus and the information that was getting out and the disinformation. And then the one we're working on now that is going to be the final installment is the new normal, like what it is that we're experiencing and how we've sort of reestablished and revamped and how we reimagine what we're going to bring to the health profession as Black professionals, recognizing that we really were vital in this whole process, right? Getting out information, helping our community understand, getting people motivated and educated about the vaccine and the virus, and just helping normalize back to something that looks like it's functional, right? But in the process of it all, I actually ended up doing another book that was very interesting. I did it with teachers because
the doc magic.
Yeah, but what ended up happening was I realized we weren't the only ones on the front line. I had a telemedicine visit. This is actually a true story. I had a telemedicine visit and I was supposed to be talking to a parent and the kid was supposed to be in class. And the mom told him to come to he had a doctor's visit. It was a telehealth visit. And he said, well, Mom, I'm in class. And she said, turn the screen off and come here. It's time for your visit. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, the poor teachers, right? They're having to figure out how to manage these kids once they're at home in a home environment. How do you keep their attention, right? How do you get them to learn the digital divide? So we ended up doing one that was called the Educators Edition. Was it? And what was nice is the foreword in that one was written by attorney Ben Crump and his wife Janae, Dr. Janae Crump, because she
So I think we've lost her, but we're talking about the 3 books navigating a triple pandemic. We are super excited. Dr. Yolanda has got some gems and some jewels. Shed Harvest is going to distribute.
Did I froze again?
Yes, you did. But that's all right. I was letting them know that we are passing around your book. We're going to have a couple free copies that we purchased on behalf of our network for those who have been doing some amazing impact work in our community. They're going to get those gifts because you said the power is in the telling the stories and you've captured those stories. But you're back, you were just stopped, you have paused with Dr. Crump. But
I was finishing that and the reason they did the forward is because that leads to this pipeline to prison, right? The criminality and the criminalization of our youth when we're truant or when education fails us. And so we end up out in the streets trying to figure it out, trying to fend for ourselves, trying to support families with limited education and limited literacy. And so there is this true pipeline to prison. And so he and Dr. Janae Crump really talked about that in the forward, and they really supported that book. So the point is, just the reason this was so important to me is because this was not just a book that we created. We actually created research I'm on my way to Anaheim. I'm going to the AAP to present 2 of my research projects that I'm the PI. One is BIPOC communities that they served during the pandemic that actually came directly from the work that we did with the book. And what I loved about utilizing this platform is one of my favorite quotes, and one of my heroes is Shirley Chisholm, and she says, when they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding table. Exactly. I mean, bring a folding chair. Yep. And so what I realized is in academia, as you were mentioning, we're often overlooked. We're overworked. We're spaces that we don't fill, like research, like publications, and a lot of that is a lack of mentorship and a lack of opportunities to get onto these research projects or be a part of these publications, right? And so,
in these academic spaces.
And exactly. And so when I thought about that, I said, well, why can't we create our own and be our own research project about stuff that we know is happening in our community? Why wait for somebody to ask the question how we experience? There is something called, this is a phenomenological study, right? So there's qualitative research. Everything isn't about quantitative. So this qualitative research study is about how we experience vaccine hesitancy in serving our communities. That was extremely important to not just me, but the people in our communities. And it would help us answer how we approached it, what things, worked well, what things didn't, and how can we make it better in the future? Because we're going to see another pandemic. Trust and believe this isn't the only one, right? So we got to learn from these things. But that was the reason that was important for me.
We're always part of crisis as we think about the crisis that hit us with Hurricane Katrina. We saw what we need to do to mobilize, so we're always prepared. One crisis, ready and prepared. There's not a shock to us. The devastation for us is just how many lives are going to be lost on this one because we haven't gotten our stuff together,
Right, and it continues to be the question, what are we going to learn from this? And how are we going to apply it to the next one? And if we continue to leave out whole communities, communities that are already devastated, communities that already have the least resources, they have the least education, they have the least information, then we're going to continue to lose people. We're going to continue to lose people of color, and it's going to continue to impact the overall economy because people have to start realizing it's not just affecting you. Like they said, if you don't speak up when they come for somebody else, who's going to speak up when they come for you? If we don't work for the voiceless, soon when we lose our voice, who's speaking for us? We got to recognize that we're a community, a global community. When we raise our consciousness to really understand that it is our responsibility to do the things that we need to do for those who can't do for themselves. I mean, that's what true consciousness looks like. And I think the more intelligent you are and the more aware you are, the more motivated and activated you are to do for others. I think it's a very selfish and ignorant space and place when you just do for yourself. It's very small-minded. And so it's very important to me to give as much back to communities as I can, because it doesn't just help me. I mean, it doesn't just help them, it helps me. When people have their own and feel pride in their own, they're not looking to take what's mine, right? They have some actually pride in what is theirs and what is everybody else's. It becomes a community. So we just have to do better locally, nationally, and globally to put effort toward helping others and recognizing that we're all interconnected, and my health truly depends on the health of others. It really does.
And just speaking on, thank you so much. Speaking on your topic around the clinical research and the research pieces, being the PIs and controlling the research, and also for young professionals who join research teams, it's very important that they're not silent benchers, right? Because that's important to how the research is developed. So I definitely wanted to give a shout out to Micheline Davis, who's now the head of the National Medical Fellowship, that is leading on making sure minorities have access to opportunities to do clinical research, both qualitative and quantitative, like you're saying. But we need to be voiced and speaking up at these research benches as well to inform that research. We
way over time. I know, and I just appreciate y'all for listening to me. I had all of this stuff that we were supposed to talk about, so I'm gonna have to obviously come back because we're supposed to talk about COVID.
You have to come back. And I've got to find a way to hang out with you when you come to Anaheim. You're right in the next door. We've got to take you to lunch or something before you head back to DC.
Oh, are you? So I'm going to make sure we connect because I'm in and out on this one, but in 2 weeks I'm back and I'll be there a little bit longer. So let's
definitely. We're definitely going to connect. I want to thank you so much, Yolanda. Dr. Yolanda has a 3-book series. You have got to support it. It's navigating a triple pandemic. But more than that, she is a motivator. She's a doer. She's an advocate. And she is transparently honest about what is wrong with our healthcare system. And not only talking about it, but being about making it right. So we love that. Any last minute gems you want to leave with our audience?
You know, I was supposed to be like, oh, what am I doing next? And I was like, there's so much going on. Like I said, I'm leaving today for a conference. My heart health awareness and health disparities awareness event will be in February. That's going to be a 5th annual. I'm very excited because our committee decided to honor Sheila Johnson, who just acquired the Mandarin Hotel here in DC. And what I really like about just her platform is she's growing Black women economically, but through self-care, through like the spa and resort whatever that is, I guess industry. And
we're just now learning how to do self-care
of ourselves enough, right? We don't put enough time and energy and effort into that. But that's right. And we're got it right. As women in general, we thought it was selfish, and Black women as a whole, where we just sacrifice everything. You know, that's what you did. But we're learning that. But we're learning. I'm learning, especially with 2 young daughters, that they really have to learn that there's a whole process to this. And I don't care less about you because I care about myself. In fact, I'm teaching you to care more about you and protect your space and protect your peace and your peace of mind. And if people aren't doing the things that actually help grow you in a healthy way, then they don't deserve your space. They don't deserve your time or your attention. And so that's been something we had to learn. And so there are these things that I'm involved in. With transcendental meditation, that's why I talk about consciousness so much. Integrative medicine, right? We just launched the Meditate New York, a Meditate New York campaign, where we're going to start with healthcare workers on the front line. Well, frontline workers, so healthcare, the police department, fire department, getting them all to meditate, but then we're going to get to other individuals. But we're going to be doing Meditate in LA. We're going to be doing Meditate, I think Seattle, Chicago. It's going to be going around. So I can't wait to do California, because I'll definitely reach out to you then as well.
Yes.
But there's a lot going on. And then the last thing I'd like to say is I'm also the director for and this is like a dream job. The director of health equity and community impact for the Harlem Festival of Culture Foundation. And that is one of those things that you like, oh, how can I marry, my real desire to do programming around the social determinants of health with things like entertainment and fashion. Like this is because this is the girl in me. Like I want to be fly, but I also need to do some work, and I also want to help the community. And I want to. So I was like, what? Like I get to do it. So it's a dream job, because we're going to be connecting ways to do programming and things like that with things that are connected to celebrities and fashion and music industry and film industry, and just all of these spaces where we don't usually talk about health. But truth be told, health is, if you don't have health, none of those things actually matter, right? You cannot, Steve Jobs would have given his last dime if he could have been healthy, right? People don't talk about that. And then, so anyway, so that's another one of those things that I'll probably be able to put a little bit more out there a little bit later, because we're just now getting the foundation side started.
But I love a balanced job.